Good evening and welcome to the March 2022 edition of the Author Showcase Series, a virtual experience of the South Florida Writers Association, featuring author NICHOLAS GARNETT discussing his book, In the Pink. The Author Showcase Series is only one of the association programs for audience development for literary works and a platform for members to discuss their books and market them in collaboration with Books and Books. The South Florida Writers Association is a nonprofit, tax-exempt membership organization dedicated to the literary arts and support of writers. Visit our website, www.southfloridawriters.org, for more information. Better still, join us and enjoy many membership benefits. I am Evelyn Benson, and I am more than excited to introduce our featured author, NICHOLAS GARNETT. So much so that to set you in the mood, I'm dressed up and accessorized in pink. Now, if you're wondering what's in it for you tonight, I can say a lot, considering the relevance of his message in understanding today's buzzword, inclusion. Author NICHOLAS GARNETT received his MFA in creative writing from Florida International University, where he was a two-time recipient of the school's literary award in nonfiction. He has taught creative writing at FIU, the Miami Book Fair, and Writing Class Radio. He is the co-producer of the Miami-based live storytelling series, Lip Service, True Stories Out Loud, and a recipient of residencies from the Vermont Studio Center and the Woodstock Birdcliff Guild, and fellowships to the Norman Mailer Art Colony and Writers in Paradise. His writing has appeared in Salon.com, Sliver of Stone, RKVRY Quarterly, the Florida Book Review, TrueHumor.com, and anthologized in Sandra's publications, Best of the Net, Tiger Tale, a South Florida Poetry Annual, Best Sex Writing, All That Glitters, Badass Lip Service, True Stories, the double album, and Waterproof, Evidence of Miami Worth Remembering. Visit his website, www.nicholasgarnett.com, for more information. Friends and fellow writers, let's put our hands together for author NICHOLAS GARNETT.
Hello, everybody. I want to start off by thanking South Florida Writers Association, and in particular, Evelyn Benson, who has been a pleasure to work with. I'm here today to talk about my memoir, In the Pink, recently published by MidTown Publishers. When I first started writing it, more than 15 years ago now, I thought I was writing a sort of scandalous tell-all about an extreme lifestyle. And don't get me wrong, there's still plenty of sex and drugs and debauchery contained in the pages of In the Pink. But I also hope there's a larger, more universal story here too, that's told from a unique perspective, mine. And I'll talk about some of those issues later on. I know that I'm speaking to an audience of writers. So while I'll be talking about what happens in the story and why, plot and action and all that stuff, I'll also give you a little background on how the story came to be and how it came to be published, which are two things I think you'll find interesting. And also, since In the Pink is a memoir, it's impossible for me to separate the story from my life, as the two are really intertwined. They say a good place to start a story is at the beginning, and I believe that's the truth. So I'm going to start by reading from the preface of the book, which sort of sets the stage for what is to come. It's short, it's one page, and the way I envision doing this is talking to you a little bit. I've got some video and images to share with you, and I'll be doing some reading from the pages as well. So here's the preface. Imagine the tribal mysticism of Stonehenge, the spectacle of Gladiator Night at the Colosseum, the debauchery of a sex tour of Bangkok, the constancy and connectedness of a family reunion, the percussive force of a Gene Krupa drum solo, the endurance of 24 hours at Le Mans, the explosive joy of VJ Day, the rush and some of the risk of cliff diving in Acapulco, and the transformative power of a Lakota Sioux sweat lodge. This was life as a straight, married man in the gay circuit party scene. Or at least it was to me. If the metaphors I use to describe the circuit appear to contradict each other, it's for good reason. They reflect the enigmatic nature of the circuit party phenomenon. Since their inception in the 1980s, these events have raised millions of dollars for various HIV and AIDS medical research and social support organizations. The circuit has helped to save lives and has provided comfort and dignity to those with AIDS who could not be saved. The circuit has also provided the perfect setting for exactly the kind of behavior that spread the disease in the first place. That qualifies as some A1 top shelf irony. Now, though this story recounts actual events, I've changed certain details, including names and occupations, for reasons that will become obvious. But there was no need, no attempt to tweak up the story. Anyone who has lived this life can vouch for the fact that the very last thing it needs is embellishment. So, if a picture is worth 1,000 words, then maybe a video is worth 1,000 pictures. So I'm going to play a short 1-minute trailer here that kind of summarizes the totality of the story and the memoir. And then I'll be back afterwards and we'll continue. So there's a quick, cute overview of the story. I really like the way the trailer came out. I think it's really fun. I only take issue with two things. One, the guy that portrays me in there, I could never grow a beard like that if I had 6 years. And also, I never woke up with my face in a plate of pizza. So the one thing I think that didn't happen to me in that story. So back to the story. Unlike autobiography, which of course would be the story of my entire life, what I wrote was a memoir, which is defined by time or events, or in this case, both. In the pink depicts a decade of my life, roughly the 1990s, during which I met a woman who I like to say blew my world wide open. And then blew it apart. The story begins when I'm 32 years old. I'm living in Washington, D.C., where I was born and raised. And like a character in a noir novel or a movie, I'm feeling lost. Maybe not in the same way like the character in The Postman Always Rings Twice was lost, literally thrown off the hay truck at noon. But I had been thrown off the corporate ladder. And I didn't know what I was cut out for, but I knew what I wasn't cut out for, and that was the sort of corporate grind. It was not for me. I was treading water, and I was waiting to see what would come next. And what came next turned out to be a former work colleague named Rachel. Rachel was beautiful, successful, confident. She was also practically married. She had been in a relationship for 7 years. We met for a casual drink, thinking I was just going to catch up. And as they say, sparks flew. And I guess they really flew, because within 10 days after that catch-up drink, Rachel had left her long-term boyfriend, the house they owned together, her beloved dogs, basically her entire life, and had moved in with me. It was the definition of a whirlwind romance. Now, Rachel introduced me to her closest friends, of course, that makes sense. But the unusual part of that was that her closest friends, almost exclusively, were a collection of upwardly mobile gay men. And far from being put off by them, I found myself accepted in a way that I had never felt before. And before we move on, I guess I need to explain the world it was I was attracted to and why I think I was attracted to it. As I explained in the book, after my mother and my father divorced when I was 12, my mother's best friends became gay men. They adored her for her accepting nature, and she adored them for their loyalty and their devotion to her, which were qualities that she had not often found in many of her romantic partners. So I was used to being in the company of gay men, but there was more to it than just familiarity. And now I'm stepping out of my role of addressing a sort of a general crowd that might be at a book signing or reading or something like that. And I'm talking to you as fellow writers now. There's a writer and a teacher, Robert Olin Butler, and he's been teaching creative writing at Florida State University up in Tallahassee for basically forever, I think over 30 years. And he claims that the fundamental element of good storytelling depends on what he calls the unified theory of yearning. And by yearning, he means the kind of desire that goes way beyond wanting something. A character can want money. A character can want sex or a prestigious job. But yearning is sort of what sits above the desire and what drives it. And Butler claims that the most universal yearning is to find our place in the world, a place where we feel we belong and feel accepted, and where we can finally answer the question, who am I? Where do I fit in this world? And it's what I think is behind all kinds of identity movements of race and gender and religion. And I believe it was the kind of yearning that Robert Owen Butler talks about to find my place in the world that attracted me to Rachel and her friends and her world. Now, I need to say, Rachel's friends were like her, which basically was everything I wasn't at the time. Confident, successful, and with attitudes that saw the world full of possibilities rather than limits. I came down with a serious case of what I called genvy, gay envy. And I'll describe the way it appears in my story. Rachel approached the challenge of having her friends accept me by putting her extensive marketing and public relations experience to work on me. The movie version of this process would be a montage, beginning with excursions to high-end clothiers, outfitting me with a new wardrobe, picking out things I could never afford on my own, such as tailor-made suits and blazers and shirts that showed off my build, pants that draped just so. Then it was off to a shishi salon in Georgetown, owned by a couple of Rachel's friends, where I was coiffed, manicured, and given my first facial. Once retooled, I was rolled out to her skeptical public. Phase one involved a series of intimate meals in expensive restaurants, where I could meet her inner circle, followed by a succession of appearances at cocktail and dinner parties. I knew that if I wanted Rachel, I would have to sell myself to her friends. Now, fortunately, I could draw upon my experiences with the entourage my mother cultivated after she and my father split. Rachel's friend displayed the same devotion, verging on idolatry, to her as my mother's friends had, but there were differences, primarily in status and accomplishment. While my mother's friends scraped by, Rachel's clan represented a thick slice of DC's A-list gay men, including doctors, attorneys, consultants, and business owners. Outwardly, at least, these were confident and secure men, reveling in their success and flaunting it with cool cars, beautiful clothes, and impeccably decorated homes. Over cocktails and cocaine, there was talk of Human Rights Coalition fundraisers, the cost of kitchen renovations, vacations to Tuscany, and second homes in Rehoboth. At first, Rachel took the lead, but it wasn't long until I was beating her to the punch with the funny quip or the well-timed compliment. The reviews came in, and they were favorable. As a kid, every time my mother referred to me as the sensitive boy, I cringed. Sensitive, I thought, was simply a euphemism for weak. But here were qualities and people who acknowledged and appreciated who I was. I felt as though I'd spent my whole life standing on the wrong side of the velvet rope, and at last had gotten the nod from all the doormen at once. So there you go. I felt like I was in. About a month after we got together, Rachel and I flew down to Miami, where I was exposed to South Beach for the first time. And please keep in mind that this was November of 1991 we're talking about here. South Beach was just beginning to transform itself from has-been to hip. Those of you who live in South Florida, probably, and many of you that may not, currently you are all familiar with South Beach and Ocean Drive and how it looks and what it means. But imagine, if you can, seeing that image for the very first time. And I mean the very first time. All of us have seen iconic South Beach, but try to put yourself in my shoes back in late 1991, seeing this for the very first time. I mean, this has almost become a visual cliche these days, right? But back then, South Beach was just beginning its transformation. And so that day, I was introduced to South Beach, and I was also introduced to a different scene than I had ever seen before, 12th Street Beach. And I'll read you a short passage from In the Pink, during which I was first introduced to a particular aspect of 12th Street Beach that ended up changing my life, really, especially for the next 10 years or so. We stood at the edge of the beach at Ocean Drive at 12th Street, and for as far as I could see in both directions, bright umbrellas lined the pale sand, set under multicolored kites, which hovered above, and lifeguard stands, sprouting odd jutting angles. Strung along the length of Ocean Drive was a row of pastel-colored hotels, which gleamed in the shimmering sun. Before me lay South Beach, its star in full ascent, spectacular and surreal, a crazy mashup of leggy models, muscle boys, hustlers and hipsters, striding down Ocean Drive, past inscrutable old Jewish ladies in their saggy, knee-high stockings, sitting on cheap lawn chairs outside their rundown hotel. It was on that beach where Rachel and I would meet a friend of hers, a very well-known doctor, researcher in the AIDS community. And he invited us that night to a place called the Warsaw, he referred to it. I had no idea what he was talking about. The Warsaw was the Warsaw Ballroom. It was a pretty famous at the time gay nightclub, and it would be my first experience in that sort of setting. And so I'll read you now from the story what my first impressions were and what happened at the Warsaw Ballroom that night in November of 1991. Here's what the Warsaw Ballroom was. Pummeling music, green lasers knifing through gray smoke, air as thick as axle grease, charged energy, manic, primal, and sexual, so strong it hummed through me like voltage. We stood halfway up the staircase to the VIP lounge, surrounded by hundreds of sweaty, shirtless men, a smattering of barely dressed women, and a few very striking drag queens. The vestiges of the Deco-era ballroom that the Warsaw used to be survived in the fluted marble columns that divided the space and the enormous gilt-rimmed mirrors above the bar. Other than that, there was not much to connect the place with its past. People danced on anything and everything that would support their weight, including shoulder-high black boxes, on top of the bar, across the stage, on massive speakers. It was frenzy, like standing on an outcropping of rocks surrounded by a torrent of whitewater rapids. I think a quick visual here might be helpful. And here is a version of what I saw at the Warsaw Ballroom that evening. Not only was I introduced to this kind of disorienting and very intense scene, but it was my first experience that evening with the club drug known as ecstasy that many of you have probably at least heard of. And so I'm going to describe to you now what I felt and what happened and how that experience kind of connected me to this world in a way that I never could have expected, but that really did end up changing my life. Rachel and I are, I should say, we're on the dance floor, pressed in this crowd, just a sweaty mass of people on the dance floor. Between Rachel's hands, deep inside my belly, grew a warm electric ball, a blend of euphoria and jitters, like the anticipation of sex with an excellent lover. The glow spread through my legs and up to my neck. Sweat ran down my chest and forehead. Despite the heat, an icy wave passed through. I swallowed, grabbed the bottle of water I had stashed in my back pocket, and took a long, slow drink. It spread through me, cleansing and pure. The music was visceral, delicious. I could taste it, savory and succulent. The bass line shuddered up from the floor into my gut and synchronized with my heartbeat. Lights blazed, burst, and shifted with the music. I felt weightless, as if suspended in tepid salt water. I smiled and caught Rachel's knowing conspiratorial grin. She was so beautiful, unguarded. Warm, glowing waves passed between us. She rubbed the sides of my waist, kissed me on the lips, and leaned her head on my chest. I dropped my chin to rest it on the top of her head and relaxed, letting the warmth wash over me, feeling her flow into me. Someone leaned their broad, muscular back against mine. We moved together in small, rhythmic, and synchronous circles. Immense, relentless swells of euphoria pulsed through me, flooding my brain, my body. Everything made sense now, as if I'd been gazing into a shattered mirror, which had suddenly been reassembled. The Warsaw Ballroom and everyone in it was throbbing, surging with life, full of heat, music, and muscle, sex, and smoke, and sweat. I was part of it, and now it was a part of me. By the way, just to show you how much Miami Beach has changed since the days I'm writing about in the Pink, the Warsaw Ballroom closed many, many years ago, and it went through several iterations. I think it was a deli for a while. And now it's a popular tourist sort of spring break tourist trap called Senor Frogs, of all things. Anyway, back to the story. I think one of the things that can happen when an experience is extremely intense is you can mistake that intensity for meaningfulness. And so what I felt that I had tapped into was sort of I guess it's a very ancient sort of tribal feeling of connectedness. I mean, there are rituals that go back to prehistoric times, right? Of people gathering together and dancing around the fire. And it's a way definitely of feeling connected to something. And we were not alone. Rachel and I had tapped into a worldwide phenomenon, the gay party circuit, which people who were familiar with it just called the circuit. And we and our friends, we dove right into it. And oddly enough, Rachel and I, you know, in this scene, we were the exotic ones. We were the straight couple who partied like rock stars with the boys. And I'll stop here and give you another visual so you can see like what these parties were, sort of the scale of them. So here you go. Just, you know, an intimate little gathering of 10,000 people. And this scene was repeated all over the country and all over the world. And it was a global phenomenon in every respect. And Rachel and I were very much part of it. By now, it was the middle of the go-go 90s. If those of you who are old enough to remember the 90s might remember the era of dot-coms and federal budget surpluses. Remember those? And Rachel and I, we started a business together. We bought a house, and we seemed to have it all sort of going on for us until we didn't. And I'll read you a little bit about how it was that I really did feel as though I had found myself with the person that I thought I really belonged with. So what I'm trying to give a sense here of that it wasn't all disco balls and partying. There was a life as well. With the fire crackling in the fireplace, the nice china out, the friends gathered around the table, we had achieved something I had never dreamed of, a sense of permanence and of place. I was home. Rachel was part of that home. Yes, she still had her tendency to be dramatic and controlling, but we seemed so thoroughly integrated into each other's lives. I could not imagine myself without her, and I was grateful too. She had shown me a path to a life I was sure I could not have achieved on my own. Did gratitude constitute love? I thought so. Was there a price to be paid for love? As far as I could tell, always. Love seemed to always come with the price of perpetual acquiescence. And the women in my life, as Rachel was doing now, had run the show. Played the game, though, their way, and the benefits were immediate and substantial. As proof, all I needed to do was ask myself the same question Ronald Reagan had posed to the nation in his 1980 presidential campaign. Was I better off now than I had been 4 years earlier? I had substituted a life filled with self-doubt for one brimming with confidence, of self-pity and meagerness for self-indulgence and plenty, of isolation for inclusion, of denial for decadence, and of anonymity for a kind of celebrity. For the first time in my life, I felt as if I belonged. But I could not have answered the obvious follow-up question. Belong to what? This was not a lifestyle that was conducive to introspection. Had I spent more time thinking about my life rather than burning through it, I might have realized that I didn't have a clue where things were headed, or about what might, or more importantly, should come next. At the time, none of that mattered. All I knew was that against the Busby Berkeley spectacle of my life with Rachel and the circuit, presented in its widescreen, Technicolor, Panavision, Smellorama, Cinerama, Mamma Jamma, 3D glow-in-the-dark, multi-story IMAX format, the rest of my life had been about as engaging as a faded black and white snapshot. You might suspect that this is what I just described to you was the apex of my story. Things did go downhill. And of course, it wouldn't have been much of a story if things had just ended up that way. Of course, it was a lifestyle that was unsustainable and probably couldn't last. It's also important for me to say here that there was a dark side driving the circuit, the party scene. And the first and foremost was AIDS, which until the late 90s was a virtual death sentence. And going back to South Beach, one of the big reasons that South Beach became South Beach was that gay men who were sick migrated there to take advantage of the weather and the cheap rents. Yes, there was a time when South Beach was an inexpensive place to live. And these men would get on disability, sell off their belongings, cash in their life insurance policies, and party until they couldn't party anymore. Nearly all of my mother's gay friends, who were a generation older than me, almost all of them died in the first few years of AIDS. So there was a part of the circuit phenomenon that was literally dancing to beat the devil. And the other major component of the scene that has to be addressed is drugs. They were as integrated into that world as the flashing lights and the disco balls. And as the drugs became more potent and prevalent, the behavior, which was always sexually charged in the first place, became even more outrageous and irresponsible. Things couldn't go on. Something had to change. And we were all headed for a major crash. And for me and Rachel, that crash happened one weekend in August on Fire Island. I'm going to play a video of me reading an essay adapted from In the Pink that I gave many years ago, actually about 10 years ago now, in front of a live audience at a popular live storytelling event here in Miami called Lip Service. I was single at the time, and I told the producer of the show before I went on that my story would be sure to send any and all eligible women in the audience running for the exits. And when I play you the video of that reading, I think you'll see why. And afterwards, I'll come back and I'll fill you in on something significant that happened after this reading that I think you'll find interesting. I know I did. A dozen gay men, my wife Rachel and I, stand by a jacuzzi on Fire Island. We watch Jason and Mandy again.
It is sex, but it's not particularly sexy. More Animal Planet than Spice Channel. The faces on the men gathered around are rapt. Who can blame them? This is at least as good as any porn movie, and it's the real thing, and it involves a man with huge muscles and tattoos. We had been warned. Our gay friends back home had told us how intense Fire Island could be, especially on the big party weekends. Rachel and I had shrugged off the warnings. We'd been around. So had Jason and Mandy, two personal trainers we brought along with us. The owner of the house is Ramon, a prominent doctor specializing, ironically, in the treatment of AIDS. He is the perfect host, anything you want, as long as what you want is sex or drugs. There are vials of everything, everywhere, all the time. If it isn't in front of you, all you have to do is ask. K, G, X, poppers, weed, Viagra, crystal, especially crystal. Snorted, smoked, or shot up, only crystal can keep the party and the sex going full tilt for days. The first people we meet are the porn boys, featured acts in a series of videos. We nickname them Tweet and Chipper. I keep forgetting their real names. This is awkward considering how often I run into them traipsing around the house naked. The first time I walk by the porn boys' room, the door is open. I see what looks like a naked rugby scrum. Based on what I hear, it's a high-scoring game. Rachel and I figure this is our chance to experience what our gay friends take for granted: voracious, supercharged debauchery. We hang a welcome sign on our bed. Jason and Mandy jump right in. High as we all are, the sex has a dreamy quality. It's like watching myself through a Vaseline-coated camera lens. Then, Jason and Mandy start having sex on demand, and demand is strong. They stage special command performances in various venues, including the living room, our neighbor's pool deck, the second floor balcony, the outdoor shower, the kitchen, and now the jacuzzi. Rachel sighs and walks by me in a huff. She slides open the screen door leading to the living room and slaps it closed behind her. Jason and Mandy show no signs of letting up, so I head inside to find Rachel. I know she's upset. The couple we've been having public sex with is now having public sex without us. She is upstaged. I turn the corner into one of the guest rooms. There is Rachel sitting on the bed with the porn boys. She's just about to inhale white smoke from the end of a small glass water pipe. Privately, Rachel has been deriding the porn boys for smoking crystal, which she says hits too close to the utterly unfabulous act of smoking crack. I have to admit, the distinction is lost on me. Rachel sees me, lowers the pipes a few inches, and shrugs. Went on Fire Island. I should be appalled, but I'm not. Before I met Rachel, I'd been floating through life, detached and lost. Then she came along. Rachel was beautiful, smart, and driven. Through her, I met her sensational friends, mostly A-list gay men. They were sharp and successful, brimming with confidence. Rachel loved the attention these guys showered on her. Strangely, so did I. My new friends were as warm and witty as they were welcoming. There were group vacations to Tuscany, Provence, Cancun, and Istanbul. There were parties in Miami, New York, Amsterdam, Montreal, Mykonos, and San Francisco. We had become a major subculture's minor celebrity, Nick and Rachel, the hot straight couple who partied like rock stars with the boys. I sit on the edge of the bed in the porn boy's bedroom and watch Rachel press the glass pipe to her lips. Except for the muffled moans coming from the hot tub, the hiss from the small butane lighter is the only sound in the room. A thin tendril of smoke streams into Rachel's mouth. Tweak says, hold it in. Rachel puffs up her cheeks and waits. Now, he says. She exhales a small plume, like a breath on a frosty morning. Chipper points the pipe in my direction. You want? Yes, he does, says Rachel. I do? Rachel says, if this is the highway to hell, I'm not riding it alone. I try to think of a reason not to. A good reason won't be good enough. Not here. Especially not here. Tweak snaps on the lighter and maneuvers the pale blue flame under the crystal. It melts and is transformed from powder into a white haze. Draw, he says, not too hard. I touch my lips to the tip of the warm glass, inhale, and watch the smoke disappear until it emerges again as a frail white wisp. There's only the slightest chemical aftertaste. A wave spreads through me, euphoric, but much more. There's clarity, perfect doubt-obliterating clarity. I look up to the ceiling. The image there is plain and unambiguous. It's me and Rachel sharing the first car on a roller coaster, a ride with no rules or limits, our arms held over our heads as it plunges into a free fall, straight down.
Well, that takes me back. That night happened to be my birthday, and in spite of my misgivings about telling that story, and particularly about the effect it might have on my romantic life, there was a woman in the audience that evening, and she and I met at the after party at Books and Books across the street from the Miracle Theater, where the event had taken place. And I guess you could say we hit it off, because she and I are married. What it is that didn't make her run for the exits that night, I'm still not sure, but I am grateful that she didn't. So, as you might guess, our lives, Rachel and my lives, and the story sort of spins out of control after Fire Island. There is a general unraveling of our lives and our marriage. And the story ends with the end of that relationship, and with me moving from Washington, D.C. to Miami to start over, and to begin to write a story that, like I said earlier, I thought was going to be sort of a sensational tell-all, but a story that would take a turn in a direction that I didn't expect, because I became obsessed with telling it, and it was my pathway into a writing life. Eventually, that story became my thesis in an MFA program at Florida International University, and it would take 11 years for it to get published. During that time, I had moved on, written a novel, and thought, well, this story will never see the light of day, but I still appreciate it for what it had done for me. And lo and behold, through an unusual chain of circumstances, which I'm happy to share with you individually if you want to contact me, it was published, really to my surprise, astonishment, really. So what do I hope people will take away from In the Pink? Well, one thing I learned is that the story doesn't lend itself to a 30-second elevator pitch. If you tell somebody that you've written a story about a straight guy who's immersed in a gay party scene, once they shake their head and say, probably what they'll assume is that In the Pink is a coming out story, or an addiction recovery story. And the fact that it's really neither probably has something to do with why it took more than a decade for it to be published. I hope that readers will look past the spectacle and the excess to see that at its heart, In the Pink is a story about a guy trying to find out where he belongs. Simple as that. Of course, the ironic revelation, and it's one that takes place in the story, is that the place I thought I'd found myself was one in which I never really could ever belong. And that's not because I was sexually attracted to women. It's because I wanted membership to a club without paying the dues that were required. All I saw were these fabulous people having the times of their lives. And what I missed was the shame and the guilt and anguish that many of them had endured to get where they were. And then you stack AIDS on top of that. I mean, looking back at it, it's remarkable to me that people were so accepting of me. If the situation were reversed, I'm not sure I would have been quite so welcoming. So what's the relevancy of In the Pink? I mean, after all, the events that I'm recounting in it are now getting on to be 20 years ago. So I think it's still relevant because I think it's a story of my seeking love and acceptance in a relationship and in a particular lifestyle. And I think that's a universal story that's timeless. And I also hope that the story captures a particular time of exuberance in the face of pain and death. I'm privileged to be able to teach creative writing, and most of my students are college undergrads. And my sense is that the generation after mine places much less emphasis on sexual preference than it used to. And I sure hope so, because I hope that means that young people don't have to face the shame and the guilt that many of my friends had to go through. And also, thank God, AIDS is not the death sentence that it once was. And if there's any upside to all that darkness and pain, it's that it created a camaraderie and a unity that I suspect has been lost in a more accepting age. And I have to say, it was one hell of a party. So I want to thank you. I want to thank South Florida Writers Association again. And again, I want to thank in particular Evelyn Benson, who's been so helpful and patient with me. I'm available. We'd love to talk to you if you've got questions or want to talk about anything writing or not writing related. I'm, of course, available on social media like everybody else, and also through my website at NICHOLASGARNETT.com. So thank you. And it's been a pleasure to share my story with you. So everybody out there, stay in the pink, okay? Take care.